This is the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and today we're going to look at the most versatile literary analysis thesis that I could possibly offer you. It can work for AP Lit, any of the questions. It can work for literary studies in college. And, well, let's get right to it. Okay, let's check out this thesis statement. Please note that when we go through the thesis statement that we're about to look at, I do have my kids use this for all three prompts on their AP Lit exam, but I have actually even used variants of this in my graduate paperwork, and should I say my graduate essays that I had to do literary analysis on, and I will stand by this template as being a strong template for writing about literature. Because what it does is it takes you through the concrete elements of the literature, mixes the concrete and the abstract, and then links everything to the fully abstract elements of literature, which is why we read literature in the first place. So what I will do here is I will actually shrink myself right down up into the corner here. And as we do so, I will show you what this thesis actually looks like. Now you're going to notice that I've actually presented this thesis in three parts. And the reason why is because I've presented the most concrete part to the part that mixes the concrete and the abstract, and then the most abstract part. And the reason why this is important is just because what this allows us to do is it allows us to see that there are three sections of the thesis template that are laid out in order. And I actually have it in a linear order that goes from the most concrete to the most abstract. And the reason why is because if we think about our lit thesis in these terms, it'll tell us exactly what we have to do when we produce our thesis statement. And so what we have going on here is the most concrete. This is where we're going to actually pinpoint things that you can actually tangibly experience in the story. So what's going to happen here is anything that shows up in this first part of your thesis statement, I should be able to put my finger on in the book. Okay? The next part of the thesis statement here, template, is where we mix the concrete and the abstract. So what that means is that we're still going to have characters mentioned. We're still going to have either plot events mentioned or things that are in the book, but we're going to tie them to some abstract ideas. So we're going to see a mix of what's going on in the book with abstract ideas. And then the most abstract section here is going to just be a completely universal insight. That means that we're not going to have a mention of any character in the book, because what needs to be brought out down here is going to be fully universal. It can apply to anyone. So this is, hey, we're totally in the book itself. This next one is we're in the book, but we're linking it to abstraction. And then here we're fully universal. And the reason why we want to have a thesis that has all of these parts is actually based on language theory. In fact, it's Hayakawa's language theory that says that the best communicators navigate in and out of layers of abstraction. And what that means is that people communicate by going in and out of being extremely concrete, moving to abstract, and then going in between. So we've got the language spectrum in this thesis here, and it will outline everything that you need to do in your paper. What's also nice is that these first two parts, the concrete and the concrete plus abstract, deal with your thesis and body paragraphs. And this last part down here is going to be what you're going to use to actually drive your conclusion when you get there in your paper. So anyway, this is going to be a quick video today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you just a couple examples of how this works in multiple different ways. So we've got example thesis statements from poetry, from prose, which would be question 2, and open response, which is question 3. And if you notice right down here, I've also got Disney examples here. And the reason why is because I like to provide different examples of thesis statements with Disney films. So we'll look at a couple of those, okay? But anyway, the first part of the thesis template, which is the most concrete, basically is in the genre, title, author's name, presents, and then you put your literary elements in, what's actually going on in the story. Please note here, though, that the word presents, you are not tied to that. In fact, there are multiple excellent verbs that you can actually use. You'll notice that I have included some of those verbs here, but also the Garden of English does sell posters up this side, right, about verbs for literary analysis. So if you're talking about characterization, here are some good verbs to actually use for that, or point of view, or setting, or irony, and things of that nature. So anyway, you don't have to use presents, but you can. That's a good fallback verb. I tell my students all the time, you should fall back to the word presents. If you can't think of anything else that the author is doing in that literary moment, use the word presents. But let's just look here. You're going to notice I don't use presents when I have my thesis for the century quote here. But let's look at how this works. Okay, we have in her poem, The Century Quilt, Marilyn Wanick, weaves together natural symbolism, so I should be able to point to the symbolism that relates to nature in there. Describes familial memories, I should be able to point to memories in the poem. And conveys the speaker's hope for the future, so I should be able to point to a spot where there is clear hope for the future there. In order to showcase her fundamental role in the development of the quilt's multifaceted pattern. And now notice what we're doing here. We see that the quilt has a multifaceted pattern, but we're linking that with the abstract idea of what her role in that is. What is that? Because this quilt is actually a metaphor for her as a person. And then we have ultimately illustrating that the family is, that family, not her, just her family, that family as a whole is comprised of the intricate interplay between past, present, and future generations. And this right here is our fully universal. So we set it up just like that, and when we write our paper, we're going to talk about the natural symbolism conveying an element of the speaker's role. We're going to talk about how the memories coming in relate to the role that the speaker has in the family, and then how the speaker's hopes for the future convey her role in continuing that family. So everything in the red is connected to the green throughout the whole essay, and then we've got the blue down here, which is the underlying insight that's guiding the essay, but we'll talk about it universally in the conclusion, and we'll have some conclusion videos show up a little bit later on. Although I think you can access one for question 2, and you can probably find that here. But anyway, so that's an example of how this works with poetry. I'm not going to read all of these thesis statements here, but I'm going to read one from each example. So you can check out another poetry one for the poem The Story, which is a great poem that showed up on the AP Lit exam. Okay. This also works for comparison prompts too, by the way. One that I wrote myself dealt with the final soliloquy of Macbeth and the poem Out by Robert Frost. You could check that out right here if you'd like to. But let's actually look at this one. I want to look at this one from Cherry Bomb here, because Cherry Bomb happens to be one of my absolute most favorite passages that's ever shown up on an AP exam. And here it says in question 2, in the excerpt from the story Cherry Bomb, Maxine Clare presents a childish philosophy, contrasts a juvenile lesson with a harsh reality, and presents an arduous journey along with an attitude of gratefulness, in order to highlight the narrator's childhood as a time of blissful, naive adventure, ultimately illustrating that nostalgia brings comfort and joy to a mature mind. And this was actually written by a former student of mine. And once again, we have all of these parts that I can tangibly point to in the text. We link all of these parts to the idea of being blissful or naive or adventurous. And then our conclusion is going to talk about nostalgia and how that brings a sense of comfort. Question 3. We can use this template for question 3. We're going to have one about Of Mice and Men here. And we have in the novella Of Mice and Men, Steinbeck presents. So notice we've got presents right here. 2 mercy killings. So those are events that happen in the story, in order to showcase the deep care that the characters involved shared for one another. Notice I've got deep care. That's the abstraction, but we're still talking about the characters in the story. Ultimately illustrating that companionship often requires immense sacrifice. And so now what we have going on here is we've got that universal application to all of our lives. And last but not least, let's just look at one with the Disney example here. When I thought about writing about Toy Story, I've got in Toy Story, John Lasseter depicts a deranged space ranger, Buzz Lightyear, consistently denying reality. So I could point out many different examples of that happening, in order to show his struggle in coming to terms with his manufactured existence. And this struggle is that kind of internal connection to Buzz Lightyear, because notice it's Buzz's manufactured existence, ultimately illustrating that truth, although sometimes hard to deal with, ultimately allows individuals to embrace their true identity. And so now what we have here are just examples of the concrete going to the abstract in this form for thesis statements. It's quick, it's easy, and it's clean, and it works for any literary analysis that you actually would ever want to do. So if you ever want more information about getting to the universal as well, I'd like to just point out that we have this poster back here, which has thematic topics and universal ideas that can also help. Let me reposition my screen here a little bit so I can get that red dot off the page. But we have that there. We sell those at the Garden of English store, which is found in the links below. We also sell digital print and digital copies of that on the Garden of English website, where you can access a bunch of other free materials. If this video was helpful for you, I ask that you just click like and subscribe. You can also support the Garden of English in many other ways. One of them is by liking us on Facebook and checking us out on Instagram. But a quick video here for today, the most versatile thesis ever. I encourage you to use it. Have a great day.